Alright, so let's try out another method now. We've seen how we can use highlights and shadows to color correct an image. But what if we don't have reliable highlight and shadow neutral points? In this photograph, we can see that there's a little bit of a color issue. It's not terrible. However, it's difficult to identify a highlight or shadow point that would be useful for color correcting. The darkest points here appear to be clothing or hair, in fact. And any white that we might have is either a light source or the whites of the eyes, teeth, fabric. And so we really don't know that we can reliably say that those things are actually going to be white. However, we do have another method that we can use. We can actually try to color correct based on skin tone. We can begin to see some reliable things in skin tones. The first step with this method is of course, we're going to have to find skin tone to correct for. Now, when we look for an area of skin tone to correct for, we're going to be looking for an area that is fairly diffuse or soft, typically a highlight area as well. So an area on the chin, the forehead, high on the cheek, if it's what you would typically consider a skin tone color. Obviously we have some redness here with these faces. So I'm going to try with the color sampler tool somewhere around on either of these two young ladies' chins. Let's try, I'm going to try up in here actually. I'll just go ahead and drop a sampler point. So I've dropped a sampler point on that area, and I'm going to confirm that my sample size is set to 5 by 5. The reason why I want to change our sample point, or sample size, excuse me, is that obviously it's much more reliable to correct for with a 5 by 5 average. That'd be 25 pixels, the average of 25 pixels, as opposed to simply correcting for 1 pixel. Obviously there's a lot of differentiation if you get in there at a high magnification in those different pixels for the skin tones. The next thing I'm going to do is on the information palette, I'm going to change this RGB information to CMYK. I'm not actually going to change the color information of the photograph because there's obviously some benefits to staying in the RGB color mode. It is actually a wider gamut than the CMYK gamut. So I'm going to click on the arrow associated with the eyedropper and then tell it we want to see the CMYK number. So I can actually examine CMYK information and correct for CMYK information without leaving the RGB color space. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate those numbers, and my formula tells me that my yellow should be greater than or equal to my magenta. They're close to being equal. The yellow is a little bit low. And that my cyan should be 1/3 to 1/5 of my magenta. And obviously in this case, that cyan number is much, much too high. So now I will create a CMYK adjustment layer, or excuse me, a curves adjustment layer is what I meant to say. So I'll go down to my layers panel and curves adjustment layer. And now I'm going to color correct for that point specifically. Now I want to put a point on the curve in that area of color information for each channel that I work on. In order to do that, I can actually control click on the image. Now this is a change with CS4. I can't actually control click with the color sampler. If I hit control on the color sampler, nothing happens. It's just going to make me move the color sampler. So I'm actually going to switch to the eyedropper tool. And now if I hold control and click, it actually puts a point on the curve. I'm going to undo because I actually want to go into the individual channels. Now in this case, I'm still in an RGB image, even though I'm looking at CMYK numbers. So now that little lesson that we got with working with variations is going to come into use. It's going to get handy now because we better understand how the colors interact with each other. We of course want to understand where each of the CMYK channels the information is going to live in an RGB setting. In this case, the cyan is actually going to be affected by the red channel, the green is going to control our magenta information, and the blue is going to control our yellow information. I'm going to go ahead and start with blue, and I'm going to pump up the yellows first, and then I'll move back to the cyans. So I'm going to go to the blue channel. I'm going to hold Control on the keyboard and click a point, therefore putting a point on my curve. And now with the keypad, just bump up the yellow information just a little bit, either equal to or just a little higher than the magenta. 27%, 28% is okay. That's fine with me. Now let's go back to the red information so that we can lower that cyan. Now with this photograph, it's going to be an interesting thing that's going to happen. It's going to go a little bit too far. And that illustrates that any one of these color correction methods that we use really can go wrong, and really you have to rely on your eye. But let's try this out anyway and kind of see what happens. So I've control clicked on those pixels to put a point on the curve, and now I'm going to play with the red information. As you can see here, it gets very red very fast. But I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep on doing it until, there we go, 11%. That's about a third of the magenta information. Now I'll go back to the blue information and see if I can get some higher yellows. There we go, now it's a little higher. Okay, so I've now got numerically my yellow is greater than or equal to my magenta, and my cyan is about a third of those two numbers. And in this case, it's gone from too cool to too hot. And there's been a couple things that I want to make sure that I point out as we go talk about these color correction issues. Is that one, these color correction methods can fail, and two, they are flexible. We need to learn to train our eye and work with photographs sometimes manually, and we can do that very easily with adjustment layers because I used an adjustment layer. This is a non-destructive method. I can now simply play with the opacity of the adjustment layer to determine exactly how much this adjustment layer is going to affect this image. So I have a photograph that's now too warm, it was too cool before. I'm just going to decrease the opacity on that adjustment layer a bit. Okay. Way too cool, pretty warm, and I'm liking this at around 60% because we have nice warm hues in the skins, the skin tones, and now there's not too much blue. It's nice and green in the background, bright, but not very red. I don't see a lot of red issues in there. So I'm thinking that's pretty good. I'm liking that quite a bit. And the numbers have kind of mellowed a little bit, but they're fairly close. The magenta and the yellow are fairly close. The cyan's a little high. In this case, it's probably because this photograph was shot in shadows. But you can see how this numeric system will help in color correction.